Okay, let's recap a bit. God had created a perfect world, and humans just kept making a mess of things. Okay, recap over. Actually, God had now chosen a special group of people, the nation of Israel, to be a blessing and make things right in the world again. But it seemed like from the start, this new nation wasn't going to have it easy. The Israelites had moved southwest to Egypt and had grown into a large nation. The king of the Egyptians, Pharaoh, felt threatened that the Egyptians would soon be outnumbered and overthrown by the Israelites. So he made all the Israelites slaves, working long and hard hours for the Egyptians. Some scholars even believe it was the Israelites who built the famous Egyptian pyramids, but not everyone is sure. One thing they are sure of, the Israelites probably didn't build the pyramid over in Memphis. But the threat to Israel went way beyond slavery. Pharaoh eventually made a law that every newborn Israelite boy should be killed. How was God going to use them to bless the world for years to come if none of them were alive? It was during this time that an Israelite named Moses first gets mentioned in the story. Most of us have probably all heard that name before, maybe even seen a movie or two about the guy. Who knows for sure if Moses looked anything like a well-tanned Charlton Heston, but we do know this from the story. Moses was one brave guy. Even though he was an Israelite, Moses had grown up in Pharaoh's courts, living just like one of Pharaoh's own sons. But that didn't stop Moses from taking Pharaoh head-on when he was an adult. God had made it pretty clear to Moses what he needed to say. Let my people go. After years and years of living as slaves, Moses demanded Pharaoh let them leave Egypt. It didn't happen right away, and a lot of bad stuff had to happen to the Egyptians before Pharaoh changed his mind. But finally, he gave in to Moses and to God. He let the Israelites go. Well, not so fast. Pharaoh changed his mind pretty quickly, and right after Israel left Egypt, Pharaoh sent his armies to hunt them down. They chased Israel up to the edge of the Red Sea. They were trapped. Once again, on the verge of escaping disaster, the Israelites now stared death in the face. But Moses stretched out his hand, and the waters of the sea parted so that the Israelites could cross. When the Egyptian armies came chasing after, the waters fell back down, and all the Egyptian soldiers were killed. Israel was free.
The goal of God in this text is not simply to remove these people out of slavery. He tells Pharaoh, Moses does, the words of God through him, let my people go so they may worship and serve me. Translation, release them from worshiping and serving you so they can find true freedom and worship and serving me. Now, this is really backward to the way that a lot of us think, because our idea of freedom is no one rules me. I don't have a master. I'm my own master. No one tells me what to do. No one tells me when I need to be where. No one calls me out or judges me. True freedom in a lot of our minds is let me be unto myself and I'll rule my own life. That's no freedom at all. That's what we're convinced is true. That's no freedom at all. Biblically, the biblical definition of freedom is when you are turned to the face of God and your service and your worship are toward Him. Because here's what's so unique. Just listen to this. Remember that description of hard labor and service? Remember what that term meant? To be used. So Pharaoh had for God's people, using them for his own gain. Now, there's a difference between the way that man uses man and God uses man. See, we look at the way man uses man, it's always for their own gain, and we are perverted people, aren't we? We are self-gaining people. We are selfish people. So when we use other people, it's always for our gain. So what Pharaoh's doing to these people, he is using them for his gain, right? When the world uses you, it creates bitterness, cynicism, exhaustion, anger. It makes you cower. Is that true? Anytime you've been used, you feel like you've been disrespected. You feel like you're a piece of meat. Someone just used you or what you could give to them. The difference is when God uses you, you leave invigorated, with purpose, hopeful, anticipating to be used more. So what is really at the heart of this is God rescuing his people not simply from slavery, but unto himself. He's not simply saying, I want to remove this evil man from oversight. I want to turn their faces toward me. Because that's the only way you truly find freedom. When the world uses you, you are exhausted and broken. When God uses you, you are invigorated and you long for more. So in all of this, what God is doing is, even in control of their suffering, bringing about their hearts back to himself. I wonder right now what it looks like for you when I say something like idolatry and what absorbs the affections of your heart. I wonder what kind of rises to the surface even while I'm saying that for you. So here's how I want to end this. As we've been praying through this sermon series and talking through Exodus, and I cannot wait to keep teaching this book. It is so profound. But for tonight, here is what the heartbeat is for the preaching team, for the elders, for you and for us, is that you and I would not view the book of Exodus as those people back then, but instead, I believe what God is saying to us, I think was so providential for you and I, is that God's saying that you and I would see that we are these people. Like, we are them. Not only are there sufferings, but they have an ongoing struggle with trusting him and loving him. That's our story.
I'm consistently standing on the precipice, right? I am painfully aware of what's reality for everyone. And so to be aware of how limited time is puts a certain seriousness in you that probably wasn't there before. I'm always serious about the Lord, always been serious about the Lord. But I can feel time now. On Thanksgiving morning, I poured myself a cup of coffee and walked in to this room. Lauren called to me from the kitchen and asked me to feed Nora, who was 6 months at the time, her bottle. And so I fed her bottle, burped her, put her in her Johnny Jump Up, which is a little thing that sits in a doorway that a kid jumps up and down in. And that's literally my last memory.
I could hear the kids and Matt in the living room. And all of a sudden I hear this crash, and Audrey said, "Daddy?" And so I walk in from the kitchen and I hear just kind of the fireplace tools just kind of rattling, and that's when I see Matt on the floor in a grand mal seizure, and called 911, and we go to the hospital and they unload him from the ambulance, and that's the first time he recognizes me. When the ER doctor came in, he said, "There's a mass on your frontal lobe. You're going to need to go see a neurosurgeon."
I go see Dr. Barnett, who's the neurosurgeon that we scheduled, and man, I'm not in that room 5 minutes before he pulls up that MRI and goes, "This looks really bad. It's signaling malignant, and we need to do surgery ASAP." And man, the bottom fell out for me, and I couldn't hardly function that day until later that evening. That I found my footing again, began to remember who God is, remember that this hadn't taken him by surprise, and then my theology actually began to help me again process. But that moment I felt like I got punched in the soul.
I remember us walking down to get some more scans done, and Matt just weeping about what this could cost him, mainly with the kids, and that it would put something in between them and the Lord, and it would be a stumbling block for them trusting him and knowing him.
I mean, I'd kissed the kids goodbye, I'd written letters, I had written a blog to the church, to me, I was getting ready to say goodbye and began to just think about that I'm either gonna wake up groggy in the ICU or I'm gonna wake up in glory. The thing that haunted me in that wasn't death, but I also know how you die of this. And I know it's not pretty, and those last few months you're not in your right mind anymore and you cease to be you. And so really the thing that would gnaw at me for the longest time was the thought that my kids would become embittered towards the Lord, towards what I treasure more than anything else in the universe, really was a weight that almost crushed me. But even in that, the Lord began to be sweet, began to remind me, hey, I love your kids more than you do. So let me ask you a question, Matt. Is their salvation and their health depending on you, or is it depending on me? Because I think you're giving yourself a little too much credit.
Now I'm seeing that faith is just believing that the Lord will work all things for the good of those who love him. And that doesn't mean that everybody comes out okay, but that he's there.
When I was younger, the center of my life was tennis, and I just played tennis all the time. And that was my focus. I was always playing a tennis tournament, doing tennis stuff. I mean, I won districts, I won regionals, but with my dad, he kind of expects more out of me, expects still, like, no matter what I do, it's not enough. It's kind of always trying to live up to his standards. The first thing whenever I lose, like, a match that I know I shouldn't have lost, like, the first thing is, like, I hope my dad's not disappointed in me. I hope he doesn't get upset. The first thing I do is I go to him and I talk to him, and I just want him to feel, like, proud of me. I met this guy and we started liking each other, I guess. Instead of tennis being the center of my world, he became the center of my world, and getting his approval and getting his attention and just being with him. Like, I had never liked somebody before in my entire life that much. Like, my priorities completely shifted. It became hanging out with him, being with him, getting his approval and all that stuff. And so it hurt my tennis game too. Then eventually we just broke things off. I just realized that, like, he never really truly cared about me all that much. My life was basically in chaos. I had tennis over here, this boy over here, my dad, my family, and like I just had so much going on that I couldn't control all of it. And to everyone else, I seemed like way under control. I had everything figured out. I was good at tennis. I had good grades. I had all this. I seemed like I had like the perfect life, but I was dying on the inside, and I don't even know where God was. I didn't have anything at the center of my life, and I was really empty, and so it kind of ended up being like, why not God? Like, why not trying something different? Because this obviously wasn't working. At the beginning of this year, I started like going to church more and realizing that I needed something in the center of my life. Then I decided to make that God. Once I kind of started diving into scripture, started hanging out with church people more, like developing those relationships with people in my church, the relationship with God was like a relief. It was really comforting, and I was surprised. Like, I had never experienced anything like that before. It's good to know that God doesn't judge me by what accomplishments I have or what I've done that day as far as like my tennis or anything, because God knows the kind of person I am. I feel a lot more at peace with where I stand and where God wants me to be.
My junior year of high school was probably the most stressful year of my entire life. I had a part-time job, I was on varsity cross country, I was really involved here at church. This was also the time when I started to really get angry with myself for how I looked. Being on track where the ideal runner form is weighing about 80 pounds. That was just hard for me because a lot of my friends, were the super skinny and just the girls that I thought were so beautiful and so perfect looking, and I was not like that. I felt empty and I started to not really care. I felt like I had spent so much time investing in God and investing in my relationship with Him, and then now I just didn't want to put the effort in anymore. I didn't want to do it. It just seemed like God wasn't putting in His half of the deal anymore, and I wasn't interested. And so I remember clearly one night, and it was after church, I was in my car on the way home, and I said out loud, "I'm done. I don't want to do this." I was really, really angry. I hated him. I didn't want to talk to him anymore. And of course, I didn't tell anybody about this. I kept going to church, kept volunteering at church and smiling through the whole thing. Meanwhile, I was just completely falling apart. I had my I guess what you can call the outside, my Kara side that I liked people to see, especially at church. That was when I would laugh and I would smile and I would see people at church and, "Hey girl, what's up? How's your life?" And everything was just, no one would notice any different. When I would get home from church, I would go up to my room and I would just cry for probably half an hour, maybe longer, usually until I just fell asleep to get away from it. It was mostly guilt that I was feeling, that I wanted to make things right with God again, but I just felt so unworthy after all that I had done and how I had treated Him, and I didn't know how to handle that. One of my best friends, named Autumn, confronted me. She started to say, she's like, "You have just not been acting like yourself lately. You just seem so bitter and so hard and so cynical, and this is just not you. What's going on?" And I kind of freaked out about that because I was like, oh my gosh, my mask that I've been building is starting to break and people are starting to see through it, and this isn't good. I got to work harder on this. So I would make efforts to seem like I was fine and seem better than I was. But, after a while it didn't work. I was at track practice and finally I lost it. So Autumn and we went off and I just told her, I feel like God is just gone from my life. I didn't tell her that I had been the one who turned around on God. I kind of made it sound like God turned His back on me. It was such a relief to say that to someone, to have someone be able to see through this image that I had made myself into. I knew right then that this weight, this ugly thing that I had been carrying around, it was finally time to let go and hand it over to God. I don't think in my entire life I've ever felt just as free as I did then. Free to be myself and free not to have to worry about being the perfect person that I always felt like I had to be.
My name is Bo. I grew up in Fallon, Nevada, just out in the middle of the desert. When I was really young, I was introduced into gaming. All my friends liked playing video games. I liked it, loved it. I really found it kind of a drawing, kind of almost addictive. Kind of absorbed my thoughts when I was in high school. I spent a lot of time thinking about video games. After I left high school, I played a lot. After work, in my free time, on the weekends, I played all the time. I played because I wanted to drown out the life that I had created, life without God that I had thrown away. I felt empty inside. I felt like I couldn't relate to people anymore. It began to absorb my mind, absorb all my time, to the point where it cut me off from my family. I tried to make video games the purpose for my life, to drown out my problems at work, to drown out my problems in my days, family problems. I used it to drown out everything. Because I was a sixth-generation alcoholic, it became an addictive property, basically another numbing effect to the mind, so I could just drown out life itself. I had 2 really bad employments, so I had a lot of stress. I picked up smoking to help me deal with that stress, but my primary was coming home and staring at a screen and forgetting that I was in this world. Now, my sister's been Bible working for 8 years. I knew she was a Bible thumper, as I called her at the time. So I was kind of hesitant to answer this, and I kind of knew the answer she was going to give me. And she gave me exactly what I thought she was going to give me. She says, well, why don't you see who God is and see if He can give you a purpose for living. I blew off the whole thing where she told me about God, because I had rejected God. But one thing I couldn't reject was the question she posed. What do you think the purpose for living is? That one hit me deep. I didn't have an answer for it. My sister gave me a book. It's entitled See with New Eyes, written by Ty Gibson. Marvelous book. Highly suggest reading it. That book introduced to me a God I thought never existed. It was a God who wanted to have a personal relationship with me. It was a God who actually really wanted to love me. Actually cared about what I did. Actually cared about what I did to myself. I felt this burning desire inside of me that something out there actually really cared about me. After I read that book, I started reading my Bible in the morning. At first, I just gave 10 minutes because that's all I really wanted to give. I couldn't see myself getting out of bed for half an hour to read the Bible, and I'd just fall asleep reading it. So I went to just 10 minutes. I started noticing how much I was really just addicted to video games, how much of my time it consumed, how much of my thoughts it consumed. It really started to bother me how much I was dedicating to video games. I really started to notice how much of an addiction I had with video games. I didn't want to admit it, but I was really starting to have an addiction. I really had an addiction. And all God was trying to do was get me away from that addiction. Felt like God came to me one day and said, I want you to get rid of it completely. All of a sudden, it's just the simplest of things, like I found out that every moment, every breath that I took, when I breathed in, it was a very gift from God. I could start savoring these small moments. And it added to my life abundantly daily. That I could invest in these small things that made my life so much easier. I didn't have to drown it out anymore. I could start looking for the small things. Yeah, I had problems. Yeah, things came around and I wanted to turn back around and run back to video games to solve my problems, but I thought, well, why? God's already brought so much joy into my life about bringing me more fullness. Why can't I just turn to Him when I'm having a problem? So when I had problems, I went to the Bible and I tried to find peace in it, and I was richly rewarded for it. It finally seemed like God was giving me a purpose. And to me, this was the most exciting thing in the world. Life's a fuller story now. Each day is a new day. Each moment's a new moment. Because I have a purpose for living. I have a purpose for fighting through the trials each day. I don't have to let it bug me much. I don't have to drown it out. I take it to God, and I can have peace and I can have joy with God.